but it's a massive Ross Dellinger story. And what this really means, I would tell you, is the Big 12 and the ACC could be getting kind of a gift in the form of a new enforcement entity that is replacing the NCAA. But a lot of the fate rests in the hands of Congress, which I know is not what many people want to hear right now. Politicians are not exactly who everybody wants to be dealing with, and they may really control what a lot of this is going to wind up looking like. We may also be headed toward a world where players actually stick around at a school for multiple years, which I think would be welcome news to many, many people. So here, let me start reading to you from Ross's article. During a 2-day summit in the nation's capital, a transition team charged with organizing concepts of the House settlement inched closer to establishing a new structure to oversee, manage, and enforce the settlement for all of D1. So the House settlement, okay? Let me just try and translate for you here. House settlement, big NIL lawsuit, back pay issued to former student athletes, setting the precedent for revenue sharing moving forward. Early April, we'll get an answer one way or the other on whether it's being accepted where it's at right now. Nobody totally knows what's going to happen there. But certainly the hope for most involved here is that will be accepted. There have obviously been challenges over Title IX. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But during a 2-day summit in the nation's capital, a transition team who's organizing the concepts of the House settlement inch closer to establishing a new structure to oversee, manage, and enforce the athlete compensation for all of D1. A new enforcement agency. Right now, your enforcement agency would be the NCAA, right? That's been the enforcement agency forever. And the NCAA may not be totally going away, but the NCAA is certainly losing a lot of its it's already lost most of the teeth that it has. It does not have much going for it anymore. It's going to become even less powerful here if they truly do establish, if Ross is writing it, it's happening. If they truly do establish a new enforcement arm to oversee how the athletes are getting paid, and then whether or not schools or athletes are violating fair market value with extra NIL beyond revenue sharing. That's more or less what you have here. It's an LLC that will be overseen by a CEO or executive director, and it is an enforcement arm to police violators of the new salary cap, and is expected to feature revenue sharing policies and a corresponding penalty structure for violators. This new nameless entity running adjacent and intertwined with the NCAA, that's the language there. So the NCAA will still exist. It just doesn't have really any kind of enforcement over NIL, revenue sharing, all of that. It will be a sea change in how college athletics is policed, replacing the much maligned NCAA process. One thing that is talked about a lot here is that they want to make sure that any type of ruling on things moves a lot faster than things do in the NCAA, which that is a welcome change I would think just about anybody can get behind. Think back to the Kansas case taking literal years for anybody to decide anything. These things do not happen quickly with the NCAA. That seems to be a point to get away from that. But the article does make a point to say the NCAA's enforcement unit for now will continue to police matters around eligibility and academics. So I guess they can keep the books, they can keep the eligibility, the money that is now entering the sport in the form of revenue sharing, legal, paying for players. That's going to be policed by something else. No name yet for the entity. Might be a good time now to ask in the comments section. Leave some names. What names would you guys want to see for this enforcement agency? So there is a committee here that is doing all of this, and the Big 12 is involved, actually. You have representatives from Arizona and Cincinnati, along with reps from Washington, Georgia Tech, and Kentucky. And then Ross Bjork from Ohio State, Graham Neff from Clemson, Trev Alberts from Texas A&M. Those three were named by name as opposed to just schools being represented there. Transition team gathered in Washington on Sunday and Monday, so today, as I record this here live, to further explore details around the newly created framework. There's going to be, here's what they're going to do. It's a three-pronged approach here. A cap management system. So revenue sharing cap, basically, again, the professionalization of college sports, the cap is going to have to be managed, just like you would talk about in the NBA, NFL, et cetera. Then there will be an NIL clearinghouse. And that's already been discussed and talked about because there is controversy about that. That will be looking at NIL deals that come in outside of the revenue sharing money that's being paid from the school. And this is where the controversy surrounds, can you actually force this to be a deal that is fair market value, quote unquote, fair market value, which would mean you can't do what is happening now, which is just pay for play under the guise of NIL. The NCAA lost all power to enforce any of that. So right now you're just calling it NIL, but it's not actually a deal or an exchange of the athlete generally doing anything for the company. In most cases, we're just giving you a bunch of money. And certainly it's not fair market value. Maybe you show up and sign a few autographs. We pay you $600,000. It's not exactly fair market value. So for right now, that would be limited. And that would be a great thing if it is limited for the competitiveness of the Big 12 and the ACC. Therein lies the crux of the issue that I mentioned in the title of the video. There will also, number 3, be an investigative and infractions unit. So you'll have literally somebody who can go and investigate cases of, and a part of this is going to be tampering. It's not just going to be schools paying somebody too much or whatever. Tampering can also be involved here. That's something that has been mentioned. So look, lots of coaches complaining about that these days, fans complaining about these days. I am sure that a lot of people will be happy about that if we're going to get some actual tampering enforcement here. But again, keep in mind here, right? Like, we've heard that a lot of Big 12 schools are going to be able to hit at least close to that $20.5 million for the rev share cap. If there truly is an enforcement agency that is going to stop any kind of crazy payments outside of that to the student athletes and make sure it's fair market value if you're getting NIL deals, that can be a real boost to the Big 12 and the ACC's ability to compete. It will lessen the ability of bigger schools like Ohio State, like Texas A&M that we just saw were represented on this committee. It would lessen their ability to just money whip into getting other players, right? They can still do it. If you're in a bigger city, this would, I would think, tilt the scales toward schools that might be in a bigger city, like, Austin, Texas. You probably have more opportunities to get NIL deals, fair market value NIL deals, and that could help sweeten the pot a bit. But I do think it would dramatically decrease the inherent advantages that would be there with some of the bigger brands. Dellinger notes in the story, athletes whose outside NIL deals are found to be not at fair market value will be ruled ineligible if they execute those deals. So it sounds like this enforcement agency would not be messing around. They're talking about ruling you ineligible. If you go take a deal for $200,000 from a car dealership and you show up for one appearance and they deem that that's not fair market value, bam, you're ineligible, sitting out the big game. That is a lot. As part of the settlement terms, there is a separate court overseen arbitration system that serves as an appeals process. Okay, so you can appeal. If you think that NIL deal was actually fair market value and they rule that it's not, there is supposedly a third-party court overseen arbitration system that would be involved here as well. But here's one of the keys. All right. The second you start to think, all right, man, like that sounds great. We don't know how a lot of this is going to break down in a lot of different ways. And a big piece of it is going to be controlled by Congress and what happens with politicians, which, I'm sure for a lot of people are not super thrilled about it. Another group here is the statement from Ross Dellinger. He says another group at odds with at least one portion of the settlement is the Collective Association, a group of more than 40 school-affiliated booster collective directors who have been publicly critical of the settlement's NIL clearinghouse. As you can imagine, places that are just doling out NIL right now as freely and openly as they want do not like the idea of being limited in any way by what they could give student athletes in the future. So they're saying, look, revenue sharing, we can't give all $20.5 million to the football program. We're going to have to give some other places. We want to be able to just, if we want to throw another $10 million out there because our donors want to fund that, we want to be able to do that without any limit. Not a surprising stance for those NIL collectives to have. And the initial plan here is at least trying to curb all of that a little bit, right? So this is where I think, especially if you're a Big 12 or an ACC fan, you're going to have to hone in and watch how all of this goes. Members of the association spent a couple of days in Washington this week holding their annual meetings and visiting with federal lawmakers. That is the collective association. So the collective association, these NIL collective associations, are actually lobbying now lawmakers, people in Congress, to try and get the ruling that they want. Now, if you ask me my opinion on this, I'm all for athletes getting as much money as they possibly can. In an ideal world, I suppose that's how it would work. But also in an ideal world, like professional sports, we do have like literal salary caps and things that are collectively bargained. That's frankly the route that I wish all of this would go. Just collectively do it like professional sports. You're already 90% of the way there. Just do it like that. Here, this is a little more of like a weird gray area where, okay, I want them to be able to make all that they can. But even in pro sports, like you collectively bargain a salary cap in a way to make it reasonably fair for everybody. So you get caught in a gray area here where if it's, okay, there's revenue sharing, there is a cap there, but outside of that, you can still just freely throw out as much money as you can because we're not going to worry about fair market value. I'm not crazy about that, even though I can understand why someone would take it to court and be like, well, we're going to sue you for this because you are limiting in some ways what an athlete could make. And a part of what people are lobbying Congress for right now, too, is just protection from being sued in the future. They just want all this codified and to get some like antitrust protections so that they're not going to continuously be fighting off lawsuits, which is exactly what's happening right now. If you've been paying attention, like eligibility, the NCAA has very little ability to like enforce eligibility anymore because everybody is suing for everything, whether it's Diego Pavia and saying, my junior college year shouldn't count, or there's a kid now that's done Division II. My Division II years should not count. I mean, the NCAA is just getting killed left and right with lawsuits about everything. So they're really hoping that they get some help in that regard. Further into the article, at least 2 NCAA representatives were a part of the meeting this week, along with officials from LBI and Deloitte. LBI is a software company that maintains the NBA's player contract management system. So they're going to manage the cap. There you go. Taken straight from the NBA. They're going to manage the cap in college athletics. And then Deloitte, the world's largest professional services network, they're the NIL clearinghouse. And that's a name that had already been reported and already out there. They will be the ones determining fair market value for the income made by these athletes in NIL deals. So they will have the ability to shut things down and or deem that something should make a player ineligible. Multiple penalties are under discussion for those found to be circumventing or exceeding the new cap or tampering, including school fines, revenue share pool reductions, and or coach and administrator suspensions. So you're talking about ineligibility for athletes, suspensions for coaches, suspensions for admins, reducing the amount of revenue sharing money you can dole out to student athletes. These are pretty serious punishments that are being talked about here. You can imagine how that's not going over well in some circles, particularly probably those with the most power these days in college athletics. Here's one last little bit from Dellinger on the lobbying aspect of this. At the same time, college leaders lobbied on the Hill in a continued effort to encourage lawmakers to pass legislation that codifies the House settlement and protects the NCAA and power leagues from enforcing the very same policies that the transition team is exploring. So this whole thing that we just talked about, transition team, looking at all these different policies and stuff, in some ways they don't want that to happen because they don't want to have to worry about those things. Long story short, well, we are waiting for that day in early April to find out what's going to happen with the House settlement. There's still a lot that has to be sorted out. You know, Title IX has become a piece of this. All the lobbying going on and trying to get congressional help on this is a piece of this. What will come of that? So it's big in that we now know that like the plan right now is to be working without the NCAA, and the NCAA will have no real power over all of this stuff. And it continues to just wither away into basically nothing. But we also get a story like this and it's like, all right, there are so many wrinkles and levels to this still to come. We don't know exactly how all this is going to sort itself out. But like I said, the part that as a fan of a non-Power 2 school, I have my eye on the most at this moment is what's going to happen with that clearinghouse and the fair market value that keeps being mentioned here. One thing that I think could be good, I heard Josh Pate talking about all this, and I figured you guys would really like this. But one thing that could come of this is that schools would structure the revenue sharing money at least toward players who stay for multiple years at a school can make more money that way. Think of it sort of like, in the NBA, there's all this talk about Luka Doncic getting traded to the Lakers. He's missing out on $100 million that he could have gotten more from the Mavericks, and only the Mavericks, because of the Supermax contract with a player who's been drafted somewhere. You can pay them more. I mean, in essence, you could pay a player more if they're a senior that's been around at your school for a couple of years than a transfer senior, right? So it would create some incentive to stay. So these types of things could be the end result of this. I think this could wind up being a very good thing, the way all this is going for college athletics, certainly a more structured thing. But time will tell on exactly how that is going to look. Thank you, everybody, for